Shabbat Shalom, Chag Urim Sameach. It is only appropriate in a holiday that is filled with light to offer gratitude for all of the light that was brought into this service by so many leaders in our community. So thank you to the members of our clergy team, our cantorial intern Sam Rosen, our Cooperberg Whitmaster Rabbinical intern Dave Yadid for a lovely service. To all of those who led the Torah service, to Dr. Neil Hoffman, our inimitable Gabbai Rishon, to Andy Engel, who is the voice of the Kahal and the Gabbai on deck. Thank you to Eileen in advance. Thank you to Mitchell for adding your beautiful voices, which bring us straight back to the sanctuary on 30th Street. And to all of those who continue to demonstrate, at Congregation Beit Simchat Torah, the joy that we take in offering words of Torah and Haftarah, to those of you who chant Shabbat after Shabbat, to those of you who step up for special moments in our calendar. You make these words of Torah so beautiful. And thank you to Yael for offering that prayer for our country, and to Ari and Ari's cat for adding your voices to the prayer for healing. Today, there is so much to discuss. It was very difficult for a rabbi to choose which of the many thoughtful and beautiful texts we should focus on today. I put into the chat, if you scroll backwards, you can see a beautiful, very thoughtful exegesis on the story of Tamar by Dr. Tikva Framer-Kensky, a renowned biblical scholar that's hosted by the Jewish Women's Archive, because that's not what I'm going to talk about today. I am also not going to talk about the gorgeous Haftarah reading done by both Shirley and Bill that is special for Shabbat Hanukkah. Instead, today, my friends, we are going to have a Devar Tefillah. We are going to focus on a particular prayer that is offered in this service on this Shabbat that we do not often see, but we see fairly frequently enough that we want to increase our familiarity with it. My favorite part of being a rabbi at CBST is that I am a rabbi of a community of scholars. There are so many people in this Zoom room who are so steeped in Jewish knowledge, who are natives of the Hebrew language, who were deeply involved in the creation of our own CBST Siddur. And so I really encourage everybody, if you've got thoughts, additions, comments, questions, put them in the chat or virtually raise your hand at any point during this teaching so that we can hear your voice. I am designating CRRI Dave Yadid, my TA, who's going to be watching the chat and interrupting me if there are important questions or comments or somebody who should be called on to contribute, as we study an important section of our tefillah today, the Al Hanisim. So what I'm sharing on the screen right now is the Al Hanisim as it's rendered in our CBST Siddur, Siddur B'chol Levavcha. And if you wanted to follow along today in Kol HaNeshama, the Siddur that we're using, it's on page 317. But what I'm working from is this is the official draft copy that's in a PDF that the clergy have, page 112 in CBST's Siddur, because I do want to point out some really beautiful and fascinating translation components of the way that our community so thoughtfully rendered this traditional prayer. So just a couple words on the context of Al Hanisim. Al Hanisim is a prayer that is offered on several sacred occasions. You can see the note in our Siddur. It's offered on Hanukkah, Yom HaAtzmaut, and Shabbat Hageah, we say. So this is a prayer that Al Hanisim, on the subject of miracles. And honestly, the first time chronologically that this prayer was authored for such an occasion was the holiday of Purim. But it's not in our CBST Friday night Siddur for Purim. Anybody have an idea why? Bill Rosenblum is like gesticulating wildly. Bill, would you like to say something?
Sarah Sloan also has a hand.
Sarah Sloan also has a hand up.
First of all, Purim never occurs on Shabbat.
Never. And
I'll let Sarah finish it.
Yeah, Sarah will finish it. Dave, if you could unmute Sarah, because she's not directly in my view, but. Sarah Sloan, what do you have to add about Al Hanisim and Purim?
Well, Bill stole my thunder with that Purim is never on Shabbat, but also Hanukkah and Purim are much later holidays, which is why they share the Al Hanisim.
Mhm.
And the Al Hanisim for Shabbat Hagava, Gay Pride, is a chidush of CBST and was written by, as Rabbi Kleinbaum refers to her, our favorite liturgist, Rabbi Yael Rapport.
Perfect. So Sarah is absolutely right. Shabbat Hagava, Pride Shabbat, and we are going to look at how the Al Hanisim for Pride is the same and differs from the Al Hanisim for Hanukkah and the Al Hanisim for Purim, which we're not going to study because it's not in our Siddur, because it never happens. It is a mathematical wonder of the Hebrew calendar that Purim will never occur on Shabbat, on Kabbalat Shabbat, especially when we use the Siddur, and for which this Siddur was written. Mark Epstein, do you have one quick comment before we jump into the text? Nope, okay. But I saw you and I know you're a genius. Therefore, we are going to study this text. If you want to know a little bit about from whence it comes, honestly, we're not sure. We saw it first rendered in the Siddur de Rav Amram Gaon, roughly 875 of the Common Era, approaching the medieval period, in what Jewish historians would call the Gaonic period, the age of the geniuses. But in order for Rav Amram to have written it in his Siddur, which was a direct response to a question he was asked, what order should we be putting our prayers and what on earth should we say? It was probably already in the ether in many different communities. So that's the first time we see it written down. It's probably much older. Al Hanisim, no matter what holiday it is, always starts with the same phrase. And many of you can sing it along with me. Al hanisim ve'al hapurkan ve'al hagvurot ve'al hachuvot ve'al hamilchamot or ve'al haniflaot, depending on your particular denomination. So this is saying on the subject of miracles and miraculous deliverances, for the heroism and for the saving, and for the wars, which is its traditional rendering. However, there are also Sidurim that say the Al Haniflaot, for the miraculous wonders, She'asita lavotenu v'imotenu, that were done by our ancestors, our fathers and our mothers, Bayamim hahem bazman hazeh, which can be translated in two different ways. And you actually see both in the CBST Siddur, depending if you're on page 113 or if you're on page 209. But it could be either in those days and in our time, Bazman Hazeh, this time, or it could be in those days at this time, sort of seasonally reckoning that, now we are in Kislev, it is Hanukkah. The Kislev ever so many years ago was when the story of Hanukkah happened. So you could say that the miracle continues into our day, or that we recall the miracles that happened. When we talk about the miracle of Hanukkah, there are a couple different answers to the question, what exactly is that miracle? Can anybody name for me one of the miracles of Hanukkah? There are lots of right answers. Specifically, there are two that I'm looking for, but I'll take lots of them. Virtually raise a hand. Oh, we got, that looks like Sarah. Yes. So go ahead and unmute yourself. What is one miracle of Hanukkah?
The lighting of the oil, the fact that we only found enough for one day, but it lasted 8 instead.
Perfect, well remembered. So the miracle of the everlasting oil, that it should have run out, however, managed to stay for 8 days until new oil could be created, consecrated, and brought to the temple. Saul Zalkin, can you name us another miracle of Hanukkah?
The defeat of the Syrian Greeks by a very small band of revolutionaries.
Absolutely perfect. So this is the miracle that is specifically dwelled upon in Al Hanisim. You see it, it's exactly the way that Saul translated it. In the days of Mattathias, the son of Yochanan, Kohen Gadol, okay, so he wasn't actually like the high priest at the time, but that's fine, of the Hashmonai, right here, the Hasmonean dynasty in Greek, and his sons, when arose a king of Yavan, of Greece, and as Saul said, more like a Seleucid, if we want to get really technical about world history, the evil against the people of Israel who forced them to depart from Torah and to depart from its laws, because Antiochus Epiphanes outlawed the study of Torah in all of the Seleucid provinces, Eretz Yisrael. A small band of Maccabees rose up against unbelievable odds to participate in what is basically guerrilla warfare, a rebellion to overthrow the overlords. And this is what's really astonishing in the eyes of the rabbis who wrote Al-Hanisim. So specifically, what we're going to see repeated here is, you stood with us in our times of trouble. For my Hebrew scholars and also for my Lashon Kodesh class, whom I beta tested this Devar Torah upon, Ravta et Rivam, see how the Hebrew root is repeated. This is a beautiful poetic function of this Mishnaic Hebrew, that you are repeating the root in the noun and in the verb. Danta et dinam, nakamta et nikmatam. I will jump to our translation so you can see. Fought alongside us, vindicated us, avenged our wrongs, but that doesn't give quite the same alliterative function and truly the growth of the root from noun to verb that's so beautiful in the Hebrew, but it is very well translated. And this is what Saul was talking about. You delivered the strong into the hands of the weak, the many into the hands of the few, the corrupt into the hands of those striving for truth, the cruel into the hands of the righteous, the malicious into the hands of those who strive to live out your Torah. So there is, a battle of good and evil in the rabbi's eyes going on here. And the fact that, while God is not such an active character in the story of Hanukkah, and notably not a character at all in the story of Esther, as many of you already know, in Megillat Esther, God's name is not mentioned, not even once. This is a prayer which gives narration to God's involvement in these moments of history where human actors, against what seemed to be completely unbeatable odds, rose up and changed the course of history for truth, righteousness, and the opportunity to live out your Torah. You brought great victory and deliverance to your people Israel, great honor to your name throughout the world. And then we get to the miracle that Sarah remembered. Only then do we mention, after really, really focusing on the military victory, which was so outlandishly impossible, then your children came to your house and cleansed your sanctuary, because the temple had been wrecked and everything had been broken. There was not even enough oil to light the lamps in the holy courtyards. And therefore, we established these 8 days of Hanukkah, remembering the length of time that the oil managed to last, to give thanks and to praise your great name. And the one other miracle of Hanukkah that I want to mention, I think, is an innovation by Rabbi Sharon Kleinbaum, which is that it's not that the oil lasted so long. Rather, the fact that somebody said, we have this little bit of oil, which is definitely not going to suit our purposes. We need something that will last as long as we can consecrate new oil, bring new oil to the sanctuary so that we can light the lamps in perpetuity. And somebody said, we should do it anyway. We should light, even when we think it will gutter. And we should make this one small step, even though we are sure we will fail. And wouldn't you know it, there's a miracle, and the light lasted as long as it needed to. So this is a beautiful prayer that it is written, as Sarah said, post-biblically. These are not Torah holidays. These are holidays that happen later in Jewish history. And we have this template of what do you do when you have a holiday that's not mentioned in Torah, where you want to give credit to God, where in our Hoda'ah section of the Amidah, the part where we offer thanksgiving, you mention God's name and specifically say, on this holiday, we give thanks with these traditional words. And so when the founding of the state of Israel happened. Here is its Hebrew. We're not going to get too into it because we're going to skip to the next holiday. The conservative movement, the Masorti movement especially, used this as an opportunity for ritual innovation, to say we see parallels in terms of the militaristic victory that happened, but also this deeply profound ideological moment where Israel, not since the Hasmonean dynasty had been under the leadership of Jewish people, had always been ruled by another overarching nation or kingdom or caliphate, that we want to use this same form of Al-Hanisim in order to honor this specific holiday when we are in shul together, when we're praying as a Jewish community. And you can see in the translation so many of the careful parallels to the Mishnaic Hebrew that were used for Al-Hanisim for Hanukkah and also for Purim. But where I really want to focus today and preparing us for June when it comes, Shabbat HaGa'ava, for Pride Shabbat. This is the Al-Hanisim that, as Sarah pointed out, was written by Rabbi Yael Rapport, especially for CBST. And the legend has it, or at least what Rabbi Cohen told me, is that she was sitting in services on Yom HaAtzmaut, listening to the recitation of Al-Hanisim for Israeli Independence Day, and thought to herself that this is a meaningful template for which to create deeply Jewish, deeply traditional, but also highly innovative liturgy that marks Pride as a Jewish holiday. Not a secular holiday that is observed by the Jewish calendar like Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Day, a day that we honor at CBST, but it's not inherently part of the Jewish calendar. At CBST, we celebrate Pride as a Jewish holiday, just like we celebrate Hanukkah. Can anybody tell me what are some of the things that we do at CBST that name Pride as a Jewish holiday and not just a secular holiday that happens on our calendar? I see Sarah Sloan raising her hand. I'm going to see if anybody else who hasn't yet spoken wants to take a turn, and then I'm going to jump to Sarah.
Mike writes in the chat, Hallel.
Hallel. Yes, I didn't hear who Dave said gets credit for that, but that's absolutely right. Just like on Shabbat Hanukkah today, we recite Hallel, those verses of praise that say Hallelujah, like we do on Shalosh Regalim and like we do on Hanukkah, on Pride Shabbat. What else? Sarah, go for it. Unless somebody stole your thunder.
Mark Lerner writes in the chat, a special Parsha.
A special Parsha. Sarah, do you want to say what that Parsha is, or is there something else that's on your mind? You are still muted, though. There you go.
I don't remember what the Parsha is, but I wanted to point out that the Al-Hanisim prayer is said on Shabbat Ga'ava in at least 2 conservative congregations that I know of in Brooklyn.
Yeah, the spread of this prayer has been deeply meaningful in Reform congregations as well. It's been, if you're looking for a deeply Jewish way to mark this holiday, instead of lovely poetry, rainbow flags, all of which are great, don't get us wrong, we like them too, but an essentially Jewish way to give thanks for this holiday, Al-Hanisim is a perfect example. The special Torah reading, and we have a special Haftarah reading as we do.
wrote in the chat, special Haftarah, and Mitchell writes, Jonathan and David.
Jonathan and David is in fact the special Haftarah reading that we offer on Pride Shabbat. And did anybody get in the chat the special Torah reading? It is, I see Neil Hoffman reaching for the chat.
Mark Lerner writes, Noah.
Noah, yes, because of the rainbow, 2 thumbs up from Neil Hoffman. So these are all of the different ways that we pattern our observance and root them deeply in Jewish tradition, updating them and innovating them ritually, but still putting us in this lengthy chain of tradition. This is the way that you observe Jewish holidays. And so what's special about Al-Hanisim is, remember that this is the way that we talk about holidays that were not just miraculous sea splitting, a divine miracle that we have barely any comprehension of its enormity, but rather the roles that were played by human actors to change the course of history. So before we leave the Hebrew and jump to the translation, I just want to point out a couple of beautiful, beautiful things. First of all, you may notice many different slashes in our translation. This is so that those verbs which refer to God can be read either in the masculine or feminine form according to the reader's preference. And you are given both options here. I also want to point out that Hebrew is a constantly evolving language, which is one of the reasons I made a class called Lashon Kodesh, the Holy Tongue, because you can see in Hebrew's story, the words that it uses for different times and different places when it was written. So I say lovingly that the Hebrew of this particular Al-Hanisim is a little bit dated, but it's beautiful. It refers to the LGBTQ community as Kehilat HaGeim, the gay community, which is a perfect way to describe it. And also we know that there are other ways that LGBTQ community describes itself in Hebrew, including Lehatav, which is the Israeli Hebrew acronym for LGBT. So let us look to the translation. May I have a volunteer reader for the words of our pride Al-Hanisim, who I'm going to interrupt frequently to point out how it is both closely related and very different from Hanukkah. I see Sarah Hirschhorn, but I just want to see if there's anybody else who has not yet gotten to speak who wants to be a reader. Dave, anybody in the chat?
Nope.
All right, go for it, Sarah. Please unmute yourself. There you go.
Am I unmuted?
You are nice and clear. Go ahead.
In the wake of the civil rights movement, lesbians, gay men, bisexuals, and transgender people began to organize for the dignity and justice that all of us are due as human beings on this earth. Those who profane your name, claiming that they hate us in the name of God, rose up to criminalize us, pathologize us, brutalize us, and erase us. And you, in your great mercy, stood with us in the time of our troubles. You fought alongside us, vindicated us, gave us the courage to stand together, to open our eyes and the eyes of the world around us to see that the freedom and the right to love belongs to all of your creations.
Pause just for a second. You are reading this so beautifully. Like, this is the voice that this prayer should be read in. I just want to draw the parallels really quickly. So again, we have sort of the historical context. We've got, in the wake of the civil rights movement, here are the actors who are our heroes. Here's what they did. They began to organize for the dignity and justice that all of us are due as human beings on the earth. And in that same section where we were talking about, Melech Yanav, the Greek king who sought to distance us from Torah, this is who is cast as the antagonist. Those who profane your name. It is not a holy thing to claim that we are hated in the name of God. It is a profane thing. It is an unholy thing to criminalize us, pathologize us, brutalize us, and erase us. And here is where, all of this is just such a remarkable example of Rabbi Cohen's, as Sarah said, she is our favorite liturgist because she writes so beautifully, both in English and in Mishnaic Hebrew. You can see exactly, you stood with us in our time of trouble. You fought our battles. All of these same roots, repetition that you saw in the original Mishnaic Hebrew of the Hanukkah Al-Hanisim. Look how carefully she has braided that seamlessly into the recitation of our Al-Hanisim for pride. Okay, Sarah, please continue. You were, right after this sentence, you fought alongside us, vindicated us, gave us the courage to stand together. And this is where Rabbi Cohen innovates, standing together, open our eyes and the eyes of the world around us to see that the freedom and the right to love belong to all your creations. Sarah, you were right here.
You have given us the strength to witness and create wonders, to be who we are and to love whom we love, not only in the safety of our homes, but outside in the light of the world, to live as Jews in the embrace of the community, to sanctify our unions and celebrate ourselves before each other and before you. The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. May we never know shame again.
Beautiful, beautiful. And then finally, as all the Al-Hanisim offerings do, it closes with this, not a chatima, necessarily because it doesn't start with Baruch Atah Adonai, but it is that same book-ended sentence that says this section of the prayer is done. For all of these blessings, we shall ever praise and exalt you. This is a special and specific quotation that connects us to the Hallel that is recited on Hanukkah and on Pride Shabbat. What is it, dear friends? Especially those in the CBST Psalm class. I see Sarah Sloan raising her hand. Is there anybody else who recognizes this sentence? The stone that the builders rejected has become...
Judy Frank has her hand up.
Go ahead, Judy.
And Joel as well.
Joel will be next. Judy, Dave, can you help Judy unmute?
Yep.
Thank
Judy,
you.
that's great.
I just can't remember the psalm, but I remember it was in the psalm class. I'm sorry.
It's absolutely in the Psalms class because it's a quotation from the book of Psalms. You're right, Judy. Joel Moses, can you help remind us why this psalm, pasuk, that line sounds so familiar?
What's the CBST's motto, basically, right for years and years.
Yeah, so this is, and what I love about CBST is it has many mottos, but this is the one, you're absolutely right. As you enter our sanctuary on 30th Street, it is emblazoned on your right hand as you walk through the door. Even ma'asu habonim hayta lerosh pina. We sang it this morning as part of Pete Huli, that the gates are opening. Even ma'asu habonim hayta lerosh pina. And this is a statement that, you know, has been used to describe the Jewish story for generations, and now ever so much more so, Kal v'chomer, is used to describe the LGBTQ community within Judaism, had been rejected, but is in truth holding up the entire structure with beauty. And then, may we never know shame again. Oh, sorry, Joel, you wanted to add something before I moved on?
Whenever I hear that, I think of when I first went to CBST, way before I moved to New York. I was trying to find it, but the ramp at Westbeth, and I couldn't find it. But no, times have changed, thank God. I figured phone the Reform Movement, and I phoned the Reform Movement, and I was dryly told we have nothing to do with them, and they have nothing to do with us. And then click. To be positive, it's changed. It's a different universe since then. But everyone rejected CBST, or most people rejected all corners of the Jewish world, the most liberal. So thank God things are so different.
Yes, and
Green
what a beautiful visual metaphor, Joel, as you describe the sanctuary that we love on Bethune Street, where so many sacred events took place for our community. But in the Westbeth artist apartments, it had that curving ramp. It was really hard to tell from the street where you were supposed to go. I know stories of so many CBST members who circled the block over and over again, trying to find it, and also to work up the courage to step into the halls of the LGBTQ synagogue. And now on 30th Street, neon lights say Congregation Beit Simchat Torah, and the other beautiful motto of CBST, Tov lehodot l'Adonai, also from the book of Psalms, it is good to give thanks to God, emblazoned in gold letters on purple glass. Like, how much more out in the world could we be? But this last line that Rabbi Cohen chose, velo nevosh velo nikalem le'olam va'ed, may we never know shame again, comes from the morning liturgy as well. Mark, did you want to say something about that line, or you wanted to say something about another interesting and important thing?
Emily Green also wrote that the line comes from Psalm 118, and Dorina points to line 22 in Psalm 118.
Thank you, Emily and Dorina, for the exact citation. We appreciate it.
Yeah, this is Mark. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, I have a question. Back when CBST first started around 1973, I think it was, or 72?
73,
Was,
yeah.
73, okay. So was it rejected by all denominations in Judaism, including Reform Judaism?
It was, including Reform Judaism. I actually can't speak to Reconstructionist Judaism. And if there is somebody in the Zoom room, because again, we are a community of scholars who can speak to that more specifically, I know that both the Reform and the Reconstructionist and the conservative movement, all at different points over history, had to have conversations within the denomination to say, is it okay for students who are out as LGBTQ to become rabbis? Can a person who is out as LGBTQ be honored with a Torah reading or a Torah blessing? Can a person who is out as LGBTQ belong to any of these progressive liberal denominations of Judaism? It took a while for the words of this prayer to come true across the denominations. And I'm really glad you asked that, Mark. Today
Okay.
is very
Thank
different
you.
than 1973 when CBST was founded, by exactly as you described, you know, those who were inspired by the civil rights movement, those who were at Stonewall, those who answered an ad in the Village Voice that said gay synagogue Shabbat service in the basement of the Church of Holy Apostles in a Sunday school classroom. These are all the heroes that are valorized by our Al-Hanisim. And in the face of these incredible odds, we have created a community of beauty. And this last line, we never know shame again, also mentioned in Ahava Rabbah, this prayer in the morning that talks about God's love and the relationship that we have with God through the study, through the continued recitation and the innovation of Torah. We may never know shame again. And so for all these blessings, all of these different reasons that we recite Al-Hanisim together, especially in this season of light, where we remind ourselves that sometimes the odds are practically impossible. And we think it's not worth it to try to step out into the streets and fight for what we believe in, when we might believe that the little thing that we do can't possibly make a difference. When we think that maybe miracles don't happen anymore, this is a prayer that expands our worldview to be able to notice the miracles that are everywhere, the small ones, the medium ones, and the enormous ones. So in this season of miracles, may all of us come to know our own miracles. And I wanted to say Shabbat Chanukah Shalom.